Speaker, in supporting this motion, motion brought to us by the Joint Committee of National Assembly and the Senate Departmental Committees on Environment, Forestry and Mining, and the Senate Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this committee approved the nomination of 3 appointees, or nominees rather, and rejected 1. Mr. Speaker, it's important that as a House we reflect on the importance of the National Climate Change Council. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I was woken up by a very beautiful sound, something that we haven't had in quite a while, and we're beginning to get extremely worried. Most residents of this city this morning woke up to the sound of rain, Mr. Speaker. It was pounding quite heavy, and it felt extremely nice, Mr. Speaker, because you know full well that the last few months have been extremely difficult for us as a country. For those of us that come from the food basket areas, we've been extremely worried, Mr. Speaker, going home every other weekend to be covered in dust. Even the hard crops that hardly go dry, Mr. Speaker, like tea, which is a crop that sometimes can stay for months without rain but will still maintain its green color, was beginning to get yellow, Mr. Speaker. And I was increasingly getting worried and wondering, what is it that you can do? And I reflected back on all the conversations that we've had about climate change and getting people to socialize themselves with the concept of what exactly is climate change, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that our environment and the climate in general, Mr. Speaker, continues to change. And if we do not do something as a human population, then we might turn up to be the cursed generation, Mr. Speaker, the one that left the earth worse than when we found it. Our forefathers, Mr. Speaker, did a better job. If you visit many of our counties, you will realize that we enjoy very good tree cover, courtesy of the good job that were done by our predecessors. Many people, if you remember back when you were young, and even those that are way much older, Mr. Speaker, tree planting and generally being mindful of the environment, seeing where we litter, Mr. Speaker, is something that they were accustomed to. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, one of the ugly sins that you will see is that you can actually run into well-cultured, properly educated, very wealthy, and sometimes intelligent-looking Kenyans. But when it comes to matters of environment, they behave in a very stupid way, Mr. Speaker. It's not unusual, Mr. Speaker, to drive down Kenyatta Avenue and see somebody open the window of a brand new Mercedes or a Range Rover and throw out a trash of Coca-Cola can or any other thing. You wonder, Mr. Speaker, what goes on in the minds of such people? Who do they imagine will wake up to just come and pick the trash that they have thrown out of their windows, Mr. Speaker? We have become what is colloquially referred to as environmentally stupid, Mr. Speaker. We do things that continue to hurt our climate, but do not bother, do not mind about it, Mr. Speaker. Yet, Mr. Speaker, if you move around the world, and the privilege of serving as a member of parliament, Mr. Speaker, affords each and every one of us the chance to travel far and wide to almost every corner of the globe, Mr. Speaker. And if you travel to many cities, one of the things that continue to distinguish between cities that are well planned, cities that are organized, cities that have got order and decency, is how they take care of the climate and environment generally, the policies that they espouse, the decisions that are made by the leaders to ensure that we guide and we take good care of our environment, Mr. Speaker. That is the work of this council that we are putting together, Mr. Speaker, courtesy of an act of parliament that we passed here, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, and established this National Climate Change Council. And I am happy, Mr. Speaker, because when we had the debate on this bill, Mr. Speaker, and I remember quite vividly, Mr. Speaker, we said that it is good because environment has become such a topical issue globally that this committee is chaired by none other than the president of this country. And we actually, this is one of the few functions, Mr. Speaker, that we assigned directly to the office of a deputy president. We insisted by law, it is in this act, Mr. Speaker, that the vice chair of this council is a deputy president, Mr. Speaker. Why did you do this, Mr. Speaker? Because we considered this to be an extremely important council that will generate and guide the country in making environmentally smart laws and pieces of legislation, policies, and general guidance to society, Mr. Speaker, on how we take care of our environment, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is my wish, Mr. Speaker, that as this committee settles down, they will get on with business, begin the very beautiful exercise of ensuring that many of the decisions that we have made as a people that continue to erode on the gains that have been made, Mr. Speaker, we attend each year. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you know, earlier this year when we were in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think Kenya was in Egypt. Kenya was among the countries that had the highest delegation of environmental contributors and activist players in that particular space. And when you sat together with them most of the evenings, you ask them, where exactly do you ply your trade? Because if there is a country, and I know this for a fact, Mr. Speaker, having traveled far and wide across this continent, that continues to have less forest cover, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, Kenya happens to be one of them. And we don't have a choice, Mr. Speaker. Many people continue to argue about food prices and all these things that we are doing. Yet we keep on forgetting that Kenya is by and large an arid land. 86% of our land is arid. The only part of our land that you can enjoy good forest cover and that is fertile, can easily grow, is only 14%, as opposed to even on neighboring countries like Uganda, which is almost 90% arable land. That's why they continue to produce food cheaply, better than us, Mr. Speaker. The only way we can catch up is if we have good climate policies, Mr. Speaker, that can only be churned if this committee settles down and does their work as is expected of them. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, as we approve this committee, Mr. Speaker, I expect that the 3 members that have been approved and one that unfortunately has been rejected by the committee, Mr. Speaker, that these 3 members who have been approved by both houses, Mr. Speaker, that they will settle down quickly and get on work, fold their sleeves and begin the work that needs to be done. I want to laud the efforts that have been made by the President in forming the Nairobi River Commission, Mr. Speaker. It's extremely important, and I saw the kind of sentiments that were being mentioned by residents of this city and those who live further down the line, like residents of Kitui and Makueni, Mr. Speaker, on what we need to do. Those of us that grew up in this city, Mr. Speaker, know how beautiful the Nairobi Yacht Club used to be, how beautiful the Nairobi River used to be, until we became what I continue to refer, Mr. Speaker, as environmentally stupid. We preferred money over lives, Mr. Speaker, where you find people that are setting up big industries. They churn out profits, yet they continue to litter their waste into public rivers, Mr. Speaker. That is part of the work that we expect this council to reverse actually that particular trend and ensure that anybody who messes up with the climate generally and the environment holistically, Mr. Speaker, will meet the full force of the law so that we can live a better environment for future generations, Mr. Speaker. I don't expect the less of them, Mr. Speaker, because in this committee, we also ensure that we included the chairpersons of the Council of Governors, because counties, Mr. Speaker, play an important role insofar as climate-related policies is concerned, Mr. Speaker. They make laws at the county assemblies, and even governors generate policies to ensure that their counties are well taken care of, that their decisions and the licenses that they continue to issue, even to businesses, those businesses have cultures and practices that protect our climate, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I find it important to have that the chairperson of the Council of Governors will, at any given time, be a member of this particular committee, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we expect of them that they shall sit down and approve and oversee our national climate change action plan. What is it that is expected of us? We must appreciate and laud the Ministry of Environment, which at least have scored big on the policy of 15 billion trees in the next 10 years, Mr. Speaker. But I met and I bumped into Senator Soipan Tuya, the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, a few days ago. And I challenged her and I said, as a senator who leads the people of Kericho, I expect to know what is our expected share of contribution so that I can lead the effort. I know for a fact that if you challenge Senator, my good friend, the neighbor, Senator from Kisii, chances are, even him, he doesn't know what is the expectation of them, despite Kisii and Kericho, for example, being among the countries that have got an above 10% forest cover, Mr. Speaker. But there is an expectation on our side. Is it 1 million, 5 million, 10? I need to know so that we keep track together over the period. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this campaign is not just about planting trees. It's about growing trees, ensuring that after planting it, you maintain it even for the next 10 or 15 years until it becomes a fully mature tree, Mr. Speaker. That's part of the action plan. On the score of marketing that particular program, I give them an A. But I have told the Cabinet Secretary for Environment that we expect before this House, Mr. Speaker, a report that will tell us this is what is expected of your particular county, so that we can sit down with our members of our county assembly, you know, and have a conversation about how they are going to budget. Because to grow a tree, for example, Mr. Speaker, has to have a budgetary allocation. It's not just enough to buy tree seedlings and put them on the ground. There has to be a budget for maintaining it, Mr. Speaker. And we must allow the counties that we have seen, some of them speak about this. I have seen some plan over Nairobi and many other counties, and we challenge ourselves so that we have a conversation about how we shall achieve the National Climate Action Plan, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I know part of the things that they need to do is also provide policy direction on research and training on climate change, including on the collection and dissemination of information relating to climate change to the relevant levels of government, that is both county and national, including the public and stakeholders. Research is extremely important in this program, Mr. Speaker. Every time people gather for COP conferences, from Glasgow to London to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and I think next year in Dubai, the world continues to churn new research information about climate change, Mr. Speaker, and things that countries are doing to ensure that we protect and we have a good climate in our countries, Mr. Speaker. It is important that this committee fulfills one of its key mandates in sharing and disseminating this information, so that as county governments sit down to plan, Mr. Speaker, they know what is expected of them. If you travel, Mr. Speaker, in many of our counties, and I've said this even including to my own governor, that I don't expect when you're in charge of a county, you're a young person, well-educated, that this business where you find young people are setting up car washes alongside riverbeds and destroying the environment shall continue to happen during our administration. And this is something that we see across almost all our counties, Mr. Speaker. It's a reckless and unfortunate practice, because for sure, if you're washing cars, you're mixing oil, soap, and you know very well that downstream, there are people whose livelihood depend on the same river. Surely, what is your mind telling you, Mr. Speaker? And these are the policies that you expect that will feature part and prominently of the information that will be disseminated to our county governments, and expect them to act and ensure that we have a good platform for ensuring that we have achieved this Marshall Plan, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, and just a final word, because I know many of my colleagues perhaps wish to also contribute, is that while reading, I must note with great impression, Mr. Speaker, the work that has been done by this committee. If you read through the CV of Madam, let me get her name correctly, Mr. Speaker, because I took time to read through and see what is it that he has studied.